Arthur Conan Doyle, The Disappearance of Lady Frances Carfax. But why Turkish? Asked Sherlock Holmes, gazing intently at my boots. I was reclining in a large wicker chair, and my outstretched feet had clearly drawn his ever-watchful attention. English, actually, I replied with some surprise. I bought them at Latimer's in Oxford Street. Holmes gave a weary sigh. The bath. The Turkish bath, Watson, not the boots. Why the relaxing and expensive luxury of a Turkish bath, rather than a refreshing, invigorating bath at home? Because of late I have been feeling a trifle rheumatic, I explained. I felt like an old man. And a Turkish bath is exactly what we medical men recommend in such cases. A complete change that makes one feel as if they are born again. By the way, Holmes, I continued, for a man of logic, the connection between my boots and a Turkish bath is no doubt self-evident, but I should be extremely grateful if you would reveal it to me. The train of reasoning is not so very obscure, my dear Watson. A mischievous spark danced in Holmes's eyes. An illustration of the simple system of deduction I employed might be found in this question. Who shared your hansom cab this morning? I do not consider a second illustration to be an explanation, I retorted with some sharpness. Bravo, Watson. Spoken with dignity and perfect logic. Now, where do we begin? Let us look at the second example first, the cab. There are splashes of mud on the left shoulder and sleeve of your coat. Had you sat in the middle of a seat, you would probably not have been splashed at all, or you would have been splashed on both sides. Therefore, you sat on the left, and therefore, you did not travel alone. Ah, now I understand. Ridiculously simple, is it not? But the bath and the boots? Oh, that is even more primitive. You always tie your laces in a particular way. But now I see an intricate double knot, quite unlike your own. Therefore, you have had your boots off. Who could have tied them for you? Either a shoemaker or a bath attendant. We may exclude the shoemaker, for the boots are nearly new. What remains? The bath. Elementary, is it not? But regardless, Watson, the Turkish bath has served its purpose. In what sense? You confess that you went there because you needed change. Allow me to provide you with an opportunity for a real change. What do you say to a trip to Lausanne, my dear Watson? First class, all expenses paid with royal generosity. Splendid. But for what purpose? Holmes leaned back in his chair and drew a notebook from his pocket. Of all the representatives of the human race, he began, the most dangerous is the lonely woman without a home or friends. This most harmless and perhaps even most useful member of society is the constant cause of many, many crimes. This helpless creature is here today and there tomorrow. She has enough means to wander from country to country, moving from hotel to hotel, and then, in some suspicious boarding house or hotel, her trail vanishes. She is like a chicken lost in a world of foxes. If she is swallowed up, no one will even miss her. I fear that Lady Frances Carfax has met with trouble. I welcome this sudden transition from general theories to a specific case. Holmes turned the pages and continued. Lady Frances is the only direct descendant of the Earl of Ruffton. The estates, as you may remember, passed to the male heirs. Lady Frances received a small fortune, but she inherited some very rare jewelry of old Spanish workmanship, diamonds of unusual cut set in silver. She was very fond of them, so fond that she refused to leave them with her banker and always carried them with her. Lady Frances inspires melancholy thoughts. By a strange whim of fate, this beautiful and still relatively young woman was destined to be the last, withering branch of a family tree that was mighty and flourishing only 20 years ago. But what has happened to her? What has happened to Lady Frances Carfax? Is she alive or dead? That is what we must discover. She is a woman of strict habits. For 4 years, she has never failed to write every fortnight to her old governess, Miss Daubney, who is long retired and lives in Camberwell. It was Miss Daubney who applied to me. For 5 weeks now, there has not been a single line from Lady Frances. The last letter was sent from Lausanne, from the Hotel National, which she left without leaving an address. Her relatives are anxious. They're extremely wealthy people and, naturally, are prepared for any expense if we can help them find out what occurred. And is this Miss Daubney the only source of information? Had Lady Frances no other correspondence? There were others, Watson, or rather, there was one other, and from him I learned much that is curious. I speak of her bank. Lonely women must also live, and their bank account is a kind of diary. Lady Frances's money is kept at Sylvester's bank. I have examined her account. The last time but one, she withdrew money to pay her hotel bill in Lausanne, but she took a large sum, so she should still have had cash on hand. Since then, only one check has been presented. By whom and where? By Mademoiselle Marie Devine. As to where it was drawn, that is unknown. However, it was cashed at the Montpellier branch of the Credit Lyonnais Bank 2.5 weeks ago. The sum was £50. And who is this Mademoiselle Marie Devine? That also I have managed to establish. Mademoiselle Marie Devine was the maid of Lady Frances. But why Lady Frances should have reason to pay such a sum to her maid, I have not yet discovered. However, I have no doubt that your own inquiries will soon clear up that point. My inquiries? Quite so. You're going to Lausanne anyway to find some relaxation. I myself cannot leave London while the life of old Abrahams is in such imminent danger. Besides, for many reasons, I must remain within the borders of England. Scotland Yard misses me when I am away, and there's an unhealthy stir in the criminal underworld. Go, my dear Watson, and if 2 pence a word for my humble advice does not seem an excessive price to you, I am at your service at any hour of the day or night, within reach of the Continental Telegraph. 2 days later, I was entering the doors of the Hotel National in Lausanne. The famous manager of the hotel, Monsieur Moser, was the soul of politeness. Yes, Lady Frances had stayed with them for several weeks. Everyone had been charmed by her. A lady of perhaps 40 years, no more. She was still very beautiful. One could easily imagine what a vision she must have been in her youth. Regarding the family jewels, Monsieur Moser knew nothing, but he had heard from the servants that a heavy suitcase in the lady's bedroom was always kept locked. The maid, Marie Devine, was also well liked by everyone, just as her mistress was. She was even engaged to one of the head waiters of the hotel, and finding her address proved to be a simple matter. Montpellier, Rue Trajan, number 11. I noted in my book, thinking that Holmes himself might have envied the neatness with which I had gathered this information. One thing remained a mystery, and I had no key to it. Why had Lady Frances left Lausanne so suddenly? Her life there seemed so pleasant. One would naturally have expected her to stay for the entire season. Yet, in a single day, she had packed her things and departed, even forfeiting a week's rent for her luxurious room overlooking the lake. No one understood it. The only clue was offered by Jules Vibart, the maid's fiancé. He believed the sudden departure of Lady Frances was connected to the appearance of a tall, dark, bearded man who had come to the hotel the day before. Unsavage, unveritable savage, Jules Vibart would exclaim, which is to say, A savage, a real savage. This man had taken rooms somewhere in the town. Once, while the lady was walking on the promenade, as many people witnessed, he approached her and began to speak with great agitation. Later, he came to the hotel, but the lady refused to receive him. He was an Englishman, but no one knew his name. On the following day, the lady departed. Both Jules Vibart and, more importantly, his fiancée believed the appearance of this man was the cause, and the lady's flight was the effect. There is only one thing Jules Vibart refused to say: why Marie had left the service of Lady Frances. Whether he did not know or would not tell, I could not be sure. If it interests you, he said, go to Montpellier and ask her yourself. Thus ended the first stage of my inquiries. Now I had to discover where Lady Frances Carfax had gone upon leaving Lausanne. She had concealed her destination. Therefore, the theory that she wished to throw someone off her trail was confirmed. How else could one explain why there were no labels for Baden on her luggage? Both she and her trunks had traveled to that Rhineland resort by a circuitous route. After learning this at the local office of the Cook's agency, I set out for Baden, having first informed Holmes by telegraph of all my movements and received in return a humorous and encouraging word of praise. In Baden, I easily recovered the lost trail. Lady Frances had stayed at the Englischer Hof Hotel, where she remained for 2 weeks. There she had made the acquaintance of a certain Dr. Schlesinger, a missionary from South America, and his wife. Like many lonely women, Lady Frances sought consolation in religion and devoted much of her time to it. She was deeply impressed by the remarkable personality of Dr. Schlesinger and the passionate faith of this man, who was suffering from an illness contracted during his dedicated labors in Africa. Lady Frances helped Mistress Schlesinger to nurse the convalescent saint, who, as the hotel manager told me, spent the entire day in a deep chair on the veranda in the company of the 2 ladies. He was working on a map of the Holy Land. He was particularly interested in the tribe of the Midianites, upon whom he was writing a monograph. At last, the doctor's health significantly improved, and he returned to London with his wife. Lady Frances went with them. This happened 3 weeks ago, and the manager had heard nothing of them since. As for the maid, Marie, she had left her mistress in tears a few days before the departure. She told the other servants at the hotel that she would serve no longer and left in a state of great distress. Dr. Schlesinger paid both his own bill and the bill of Lady Frances. And you know, the manager of the Albion said in conclusion, "You're not the only one of Lady Frances's friends who is looking for her. Only a week ago, a man came here to inquire about her. Did he give his name? No, he was an Englishman, though his appearance was not typical for one. A bit like a savage, was he?" I asked, linking the known facts according to the method of my illustrious friend. Yes, exactly like a savage. That word fits him perfectly. Very tall, sunburnt, bearded, the sort of man who belongs in a village tavern rather than a fashionable hotel. A regular firebrand. A violent fellow, I should say. I would be very careful not to cross him. At last, the outlines began to take shape, just as the figures of pedestrians on a street become clearer when the fog thins. A sinister shadow was prowling at the heels of this trusting, devout woman. She feared her pursuer. Otherwise, she would not have fled so hastily from Lausanne. He was hunting her again. Sooner or later, he would overtake her. Or perhaps, had he overtaken her already? Was this the explanation for her long silence? Did the good people she had befriended in Baden fail to protect her from his threats and harassment? What terrible secret, What inscrutable purpose drove him to pursue Lady Frances so relentlessly? These questions awaited my solution. I wrote of everything to Holmes, pleased that I had reached the heart of the matter so quickly. In reply, I received a telegram asking me to describe Dr. Schlesinger's left ear. Holmes has a peculiar sense of humor, sometimes even an insulting one. I naturally ignored his ill-timed jest. Besides, I received his message only when I reached Montpellier, where I had gone to see Marie Devine. I easily found the former maid's house and drew from her all that she knew. She was very fond of her mistress, and had left her only because the lady was now surrounded by friends. Of this Marie was certain, and also because her wedding day was approaching, and she would have had to leave her service in any case. She admitted sorrowfully that while they were in Baden, Lady Frances had often been cross with her, even questioning her honesty on one occasion, and because of this slight, Marie had found the parting easier than she had expected. Lady Frances had given her £50 as a wedding present. Like me, the girl felt a serious apprehension regarding the stranger who had driven her mistress from Lausanne. She had seen with her own eyes how he had roughly seized Lady Frances by the arm in plain view of everyone. A terrifying man, quite mad. No doubt Lady Frances had gone to London with the Schlesingers because she feared him. She never spoke of him to Marie, but the girl could see by many signs that her mistress was haunted by a persistent and agonizing fear. "There he is! Look!" The girl suddenly interrupted her story, springing from her chair in alarm. "The scoundrel is tracking her again." Through the open window of the sitting room, I saw a very tall, dark man with a black, curly beard. He was walking slowly along the pavement, looking intently at the house numbers. There could be no doubt. He, like me, was searching for the maid. Without a second thought, I dashed out into the street and stopped him. "Are you an Englishman?" I asked. "And what if I am?" he growled. "May I ask your name?" "You may not," he snapped. The situation was becoming complicated. I decided to go straight to the point, for the direct path is the shortest, and asked sternly, "Where is Lady Frances Carfax?" He stared at me in amazement. "What have you done with her? Why are you pursuing her? I demand an answer." With a furious cry, the man lunged at me like a tiger. I have held my own in many a fight, but this madman had iron grip and the strength of a frantic bull. Not 3 seconds had passed before he had me by the throat. I began to lose consciousness, but then a bearded French workman in a blue blouse ran out from the tavern opposite, struck my assailant on the shoulder with a cudgel, and forced him to let me go. For a minute the man stood shaking with rage, wondering whether to rush at me again. Then he hissed viciously and strode toward the house I had just left. I turned to thank my rescuer. He was still standing beside me on the pavement, and suddenly I heard, "Well, congratulations, Watson. You really have made a mess of things. It seems you must return with me to London by the night express." An hour later, Sherlock Holmes, now in his own person and as elegant as ever, sat in my hotel room. The explanation for his sudden and fortunate appearance was simple enough. Circumstances had allowed him to leave London, and he had decided to intercept me at the very spot where he calculated I would be at that hour. Dressed as a workman, he had been waiting for me in the tavern. And how consistently you acted, my dear Watson. Of all the mistakes that could possibly be made, you did not miss a single one. As a result, you have scared off everyone who could be scared, and you have discovered absolutely nothing. Perhaps you would not have succeeded any better, I retorted with some pique. There is no perhaps about it, Watson. I have succeeded better. And here is the Honorable Philip Green. He is your neighbor in the hotel. Perhaps with his assistance, we may be able to conduct the matter more successfully." A waiter presented a business card on a tray, and into the room walked the very same bearded ruffian who had assaulted me in the street. He started at the sight of me. "What does this mean, Mr. Holmes?" he asked. "I received your note, and I have come. But how do you explain the presence of this man?" "This gentleman is my old friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, who is assisting us in our search." The stranger held out a sunburned hand to me and began to apologize. "I sincerely hope that you have not suffered from my hands. When you began to accuse me of some misconduct toward her, I lost my self-control. I am living in a state of fever just now. My nerves are all to pieces. But tell me, for heaven's sake, Mr. Holmes, how did you even know of my existence?" "I have been in communication with Lady Frances's former governess, Miss Daubney. Dear old Susan Daubney, in her eternal cap. I remember her well, and she remembers you, just as you were before you went away to Africa. So, you know everything. It is well, for I have nothing to conceal from you, Mr. Holmes. I swear to you, there was no man in the world who loved a woman more than I loved Frances. But in my youth, I led a wild life, as did many young men of our circle, while her soul was as pure as snow. Anything coarse or low was unbearable to her. When someone told her of my past, she refused to see me again. And yet, this saintly woman loved me. That is the wonder of it. She loved me so much that she remained alone for my sake all her life. I went to Barberton. Many years passed. I made a fortune, and at last I resolved to find her and try to make amends. I knew that she had never married. I found her in Lausanne and began to plead for her forgiveness. I believe her heart was not deaf to my prayer, but her will was unshakable, and when I went to her the next day, she had already left the city. I managed to learn that she had gone to Baden, and after a while, I heard that her maid lived here. I am a rough man, having lived all these years among simple folk, and so I exploded when Dr. Watson spoke to me. What has happened to Lady Frances? That is exactly what we must find out, Holmes said very seriously. Where will you stay in London? At the Langham Hotel. Then I shall ask you to go to London at once and remain in readiness. I do not wish to give you false hopes, Mr. Green, but you may be assured that everything possible will be done to save Lady Frances. For now, I can say no more. Here is my card. Keep in touch with me at all times. And now, Watson, if you will begin to pack, I shall go to the telegraph office and ask Mrs. Hudson to demonstrate her art to 2 hungry travelers tomorrow at 7:30. At Baker Street, a telegram awaited us. Holmes read it with hungry interest and handed it to me. It had been sent from Baden and contained but one word, jagged. What nonsense is this? I asked in surprise. This nonsense has a great meaning, said Holmes. You remember, I hope, the request I made of you, which might have seemed absurd at first glance, to describe the left ear of the venerable missionary? You ignored it. I cannot make inquiries. By that time, I was no longer in Baden. Exactly. That is why I sent a telegram with the very same request to the manager of the Albion. Here is his reply. And what does his reply tell us? It tells us, my dear Watson, that we are dealing with a man who is exceedingly cunning and dangerous. The missionary from South Africa, Dr. Schlesinger, is none other than Holy Peters, one of the most clever criminals ever produced by Australia, and that young country has already turned out many exemplary specimens. Peters specializes in lonely women, whom he lures into a trap by playing upon their religious feelings, while a certain Englishwoman named Fraser, his so-called wife, assists him. Dr. Schlesinger's tactics gave me reason to suspect that he was not Schlesinger, but wholly Peter's. The telegram describing his left ear, it was bitten in a pub fight in Adelaide in the year 1889, confirmed my suspicions. Poor Lady Frances is in the hands of terrible people. Watson, they will stop at nothing. It is very possible that she is no longer alive. If she is alive, she is being held under lock and key and cannot write to Miss Daubney or to anyone else. Perhaps she never reached London, though that is unlikely. The Continental Police are not to be trifled with, and with their system of registration, it is hard to deceive them. Or she may have traveled further. But that, too, is improbable, for London is the only place in England where scoundrels could hide a person so that no one would suspect a thing. My sixth sense tells me she is in London, but as yet we do not know where to look. Therefore, there is only one way. We must have patience. For now, let us have dinner, and later this evening I shall drop by Scotland Yard to have a word with our friend Lestrade. Time passed, but neither the police nor Holmes's own information service, a small but very effective organization, managed even to come close to the mystery. The people we were looking for were lost in the multi-million city of London like a needle in a haystack. We placed advertisements in the newspapers and maintained a tireless watch over all the haunts where Peters might appear. We kept an eye on people with whom he had once been connected, but all was in vain. Every path inevitably led us to a dead end. And then, after a week of fruitless searching and agonizing uncertainty, a light suddenly dawned. A silver pendant with diamonds of old Spanish workmanship was brought to Bevington's pawn shop on Westminster Road. It was pledged by a tall man without a beard or mustache, who looked like a clergyman. Both the name and the address he gave were clearly false. Mr. Bevington did not notice the shape of the man's ear, but judging by the portrait, it was clearly Schlesinger. 3 times our bearded friend from the Langham Hotel visited us. The 3rd time, he appeared just half an hour after we had been informed of the sole piece of jewelry. Grief had aged him by several years. His clothes hung on him as if on a rack. "If only I could help you in some way," he had repeated in despair all those days. At last, Holmes had a task for him. He has begun to sell the jewelry. Now we shall catch him. But does it mean that something has happened to Lady Frances? Holmes's face became very grave. Suppose these people have held her under lock and key until now. To release her now would mean their own destruction. Mr. Green, we must be prepared for the worst. What must I do? Do these people know you? No. It is possible he will go to a different jeweler next time. Then we should have to start all over again. On the other hand, Bevington gave him a good price and asked no questions. Therefore, we may expect that when he needs money again, he will return there. I shall now write a note to Bevington, stating that you must remain in his shop without leaving. If Peters comes, you will follow him to his house. But there must be no rashness and, above all, no violence. Give me your word that you will do nothing without my knowledge and consent. For 2 days, there was no word from the Honorable Philip Green, who, by the way, was the son of the famous Admiral Green, who commanded our Azov fleet during the Crimean campaign. On the evening of the 3rd day, he burst into the sitting room at Baker Street, pale and trembling as if in a fever. "He is caught! He is caught!" he cried. Excitement made it difficult for him to speak. Holmes sat him in an armchair and began to calm him down. "Tell us everything in order," Holmes finally requested. "She came just an hour ago. This time the wife brought a pendant exactly like the first one. A tall, pale woman with eyes like a ferret's." "That is she," Holmes confirmed. "I followed her. She turned into Kennington Road. I did not fall behind. Suddenly, she entered a shop. Mr. Holmes. It turned out to be an undertaker's shop. Holmes shuddered. Go on. His voice rang out, betraying the excitement that had seized a fiery soul he usually hid behind a mask of icy calm. I followed her in. She was talking to a woman behind the counter, and her words reached me. How long you have been? The woman began to make excuses. Everything will be delivered to the address immediately. It had to be made to a special order, you see, and that is why the workmen were delayed. At that point, they saw me and fell silent. I asked for something and went out into the street. Quite right. What happened then? The woman came out too, but I hid in a nearby doorway. She must have suspected something, for she looked all around. Then she hailed a hansom cab and drove off. Fortunately, I immediately caught another cab and followed her. She got out in Brixton at 36 Pulteney Square. I drove further on, dismissed the cabman, and began to watch the house. Did you manage to see anyone? A light was burning in only one window on the ground floor, but the blind was down and nothing could be seen. I stood there wondering what to do next, when suddenly a closed van pulled up at the curb. Two men jumped out onto the pavement, pulled something out of the van, and carried it onto the porch. Mr. Holmes, it was a coffin. So that is it. I do not know how I managed to stand my ground. The door opened to admit the men and the thing they carried, and I saw that very same woman. But she noticed me, too, and I believe she recognized me. With a shudder, she hastily slammed the door. I remembered the promise you made me give, and I flew here to you. You have conducted the matter very well. Holmes snatched a scrap of paper from the table and began to write. Without a warrant for arrest, we have no right to take any action. The best thing you can do now, Mr. Green, is to take my note to the police and obtain that warrant. There may be difficulties, but I believe the sale of the jewelry is sufficient grounds. Lestrade will handle the details, but she will be murdered in the meantime. What does that coffin mean, and for whom is it intended, if not for her? Mr. Green, everything possible will be done. We shall not lose a minute. Rely on us. Now then, Watson, Holmes continued as our guest hurried out of the room, he will now secure the support of the law, while we, meanwhile, must act as we so often do, outside of it. I fear things are so bad that even our most extreme measures will be justified. Quickly, to Pulteney Square. Let us try to reconstruct the whole picture, Holmes said as our cab rattled past the Houses of Parliament and over Westminster Bridge. The scoundrels lured the unfortunate woman to London, having first forced her to part with her devoted Marie. If Lady Frances wrote to anyone during this time, her letters were intercepted. One of Peters's accomplices took a house for him in London. Once she crossed the threshold of that house, Lady Frances became a prisoner, and the jewels, which these people had been hunting from the very beginning, became their prey. They're already selling them off bit by bit, seeing no danger for themselves, confident that no one is interested in the fate of their victim. If she were released, she would of course expose them. Therefore, they will never let her go. However, they cannot keep her under lock and key forever. Thus, the only way out is murder. It is all perfectly clear. Now let us look at the matter from the other side. When two paths of thought cross, the point of intersection gives the maximum approximation to the truth. Let us now take the coffin as our starting point and work backward. I fear this coffin confirms beyond doubt that Lady Frances is dead. But, moreover, it implies an official funeral, a doctor's certificate, and police permission. Had Lady Frances been killed by some primitive means, the body would have been buried in the backyard. But here, everything is open and public. What does this mean? It means she was put to death in so unusual a way that even a doctor did not suspect foul play. Perhaps she was poisoned with some rare toxin. And yet, it is strange that they allowed a doctor to examine her. Unless, of course, they bribed him. But that is highly unlikely. Could they not have forged the certificate? That is dangerous, Watson. Very dangerous. I do not think they would have dared. Huh. Wait. Stop. Holmes called to the driver. We have just passed the pawn shop, which means the next building is the undertaker's. Watson, you have a trustworthy face. Go in and ask them at what time the funeral for the client from Pulteney Square is scheduled tomorrow. The woman behind the counter told me quite readily that the funeral was to take place tomorrow at 8 in the morning. You see, Watson, there are no secrets or evasions. They have somehow managed to arrange everything officially, and now they believe they have nothing to fear. Well, we have only one choice, to force our way in. Are you armed? I have my cane. No matter. We shall break through somehow. Thrice is he armed that hath his quarrel just. We simply cannot wait for the police. The situation is not such that we can afford to follow the letter of the law with pedantry. Drive on, please. We shall try our luck together, Watson. It is not the first time. He gave a sharp pull at the bell pull of a large, dark house. The door was opened immediately, and in the dim light of the hall, we saw a tall female figure. "What is your business?" the woman asked dryly, trying to see us in the darkness. "I wish to see Dr. Schlesinger," Holmes replied. "There is no Dr. Schlesinger here." The woman tried to slam the door, but Holmes wedged his boot in the opening. "In that case, I wish to see the man who lives in this house, by whatever name he calls himself," Holmes said insistently. She hesitated, then finally let us in. "Well, come in then. My husband is afraid of no one." She locked the front door, let us into the sitting room, lit the light, and left, asking us to wait a moment. But we did not have to wait even half a minute. Before we could even glance around the room in which we found ourselves, dusty and furnished with moth-eaten chairs, the door opened, and a tall, bald man entered the room with a noiseless tread. His broad, rubicund face, with its sagging cheeks, shone with an exaggerated benevolence that was entirely contradicted by the hard expression of his merciless mouth. "There is surely some mistake here. Gentlemen," he addressed us in a smooth, oily tone. "You have evidently been given the wrong address. If you go a little further to the left." "We're going nowhere," my friend said coldly. "We have no time to waste. Mr. Henry Peters of Adelaide, formerly the Reverend Dr. Schlesinger of Baden in South Africa. I am as certain of that as I am that my own name is Sherlock Holmes. Peters, for so I shall now call him," gave a start and fixed his eyes upon his formidable opponent. "Well then, Mr. Holmes, your name does not frighten me," he said. "When a man's conscience is clear, he has nothing to fear. What do you want in my house? I want to know what you have done with Lady Frances Carfax, whom you brought with you from Baden. I should be exceedingly obliged if you could tell me where she is yourself." Peters replied calmly. "She owes me nearly £100, and, as payment, she left a couple of tasteless pendants with imitation stones. The pawnbroker would not even look at them. Lady Frances attached herself to Mrs. Peters and me in Baden. I was indeed living there under another name, and did not part from us until we reached London. I paid her hotel bill and her fare. In London, she vanished, leaving behind, as I told you, those old-fashioned trinkets as payment for her debt. If you find her, Mr. Holmes, I shall be very much in your debt." "I shall find her," said Holmes, "and I shall search this house until I do. Where is your warrant?" Holmes produced a revolver from his pocket and showed it to Peters before sliding it back. "You will have to be satisfied with this for now. Why, you are nothing but a common burglar." "I have no objection to the description," Holmes laughed. "My companion is also a most dangerous ruffian, I assure you. And now we begin our search." Peters threw open the door into the hall. "Annie, run for the police." There was a rustle of skirts on the stairs, and the front door opened and slammed. "Our time is short, Watson," said Holmes. "Come, and do not think of interfering, Peters, or it will be the worse for you. Where is the coffin that was brought to you today?" "What do you want with the coffin?" "It is occupied. There is a dead body in it. I must see it." "Never. I will not allow it." "We shall do without your permission." With a lightning movement, Holmes pushed Peters aside and stepped into the hall. Directly before us was a half-open door. We entered. In the dining room, under the dim light of the gas chandelier, a coffin stood upon the table. Holmes turned up the light and lifted the lid. A wretched, emaciated creature lay at the bottom of the deep casket. The bright light fell upon a withered, aged face. Neither illness, nor hunger, nor the most brutal torture could have transformed the still beautiful and flourishing woman that Lady Frances had been into this ancient wreck. The look of astonishment on Holmes's face gave way to one of relief. "Thank God," he cried. "It is not she. Yes, you have made a monstrous mistake this time, Mr. Holmes," said the voice of Peters, who had followed us into the dining room. "Who is this woman?" "I can tell you, if you're so interested. This woman was my wife's old nurse. Her name was Rosa Spencer. We brought her here from the Brixton workhouse, called in Dr. Horsam. He lives at number 13, Furbank Villas. Do not forget to note it down, Mr. Holmes." And surrounded her with the care that our Christian duty demanded. On the third day, she passed away. The certificate says senile decay, but that, of course, is only a doctor's opinion. You, Mr. Holmes, doubtless know the true cause of death better than anyone. We employed the firm of Stimson and Company of Kennington Road, and the funeral is at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Try to find a single flaw in that. Admit it, Mr. Holmes, you have been made a fool of. I would give a great deal to have a photograph of your face when you rushed so gallantly at the coffin, only to find a poor old woman of 90 inside. Holmes stood with his usual composure under the storm of mockery that Peters poured upon him, but I could see that his fists were clenched in silent fury. "I shall continue my search." "We shall see about that," Peters cried. At that moment, a woman's voice and heavy footsteps resounded in the hall. "This way, gentlemen. These men have broken into my house by force, and I cannot get them to leave. Help me, please." A sergeant and a constable appeared in the doorway of the dining room. Holmes drew his card case from his pocket. "Here is my name and address. And this is my friend, Dr. Watson." "Bless you, sir, we know you well enough," said the sergeant. "But you cannot stay here without a warrant, you know that. I am aware of it." "Arrest him," Peters shouted. "We know where to find this gentleman if he is wanted," the sergeant replied grandly. "But all the same, you must go, Mr. Holmes." "Yes, Watson, we must go." A minute later we were back in the street. Holmes seemed as calm as ever, but I was burning with anger and humiliation. The sergeant came out with us. "I am sorry, Mr. Holmes. It is the law, you see." "Quite right, Sergeant. You could not have done otherwise. Of course, you wouldn't have gone there for nothing. I understand that. If there is anything I can do to help. A woman is missing, Sergeant, and we suspect she is being hidden in that house. I am expecting a warrant at any moment. Then I shall keep a sharp eye on them, Mr. Holmes, and if anything happens, I shall let you know at once." It was only 9 o'clock, and Holmes and I, losing not a moment, set out on our way. Our first visit was to the Brixton workhouse. There we learned that a few days ago, a married couple had indeed come there, expressing a desire to take in an old, senile woman who had once been in their service, as they claimed. Having received permission, they took her home. When we mentioned that the old woman had died, no one at the workhouse was surprised. Our next visit was to Dr. Horsam. He told us that on the previous afternoon he had been called to a patient who, as he determined, was dying of senile decay. She had breathed her last in his presence. He had filled out the death certificate in due form and signed it. I assure you, the end of that woman was perfectly natural. Any suspicions are quite unjustified, he concluded. He had noticed nothing unusual in the house, except, perhaps, that it seemed a little strange that people of such means lived without any servants. That was all we could learn from Dr. Horsam. Finally, we went to Scotland Yard. It turned out that there were some difficulties in issuing the warrant. The matter was being delayed, and the magistrate's signature could not be obtained before morning. If Mr. Holmes would call at 9 the next day, he could go with Inspector Lestrade and be present at the arrest. No other events occurred that day, except for a midnight visit from our friend the sergeant. He came to tell us that a light had flickered several times in the dark windows of the house in Pulteney Square, but no one had entered or left. We had no choice but to be patient and wait for the morning. Sherlock Holmes was too distressed to talk and too agitated to sleep. I went to my room, while he remained in the sitting room. With his dark, thick brows drawn together, he sat in his armchair, drumming his long, nervous fingers on the armrest, smoking one cigarette after another, searching for the key to the mystery. Several times during the night, I heard his footsteps. In the morning, while I was washing, he burst into my room, pale, hollow-cheeked, having not closed his eyes for a single moment. "When is the funeral?" "At 8, isn't it?" "It is 20 minutes past 7 now," he spoke abruptly. "Where is the mind that God Almighty put into my head? Quick, Watson, quick! It is a matter of life and death, and 100 to 1 on death. If we are too late, I shall never forgive myself." In less than 5 minutes, we were racing in a hansom cab down Baker Street. But as we approached the Houses of Parliament, Big Ben showed 25 minutes to 8, and at the corner of Brixton Road, the hand touched the hour. However, we were not the only latecomers. At 10 minutes past 8, the cabman pulled up his foaming horse at the curb, where the hearse was still waiting. 3 workmen were carrying a coffin out of the door. Holmes dashed forward and barred their way. "Stop!" he cried, putting his hand on the chest of the foremost bearer. "Take that coffin back inside this instant. What the devil are you doing here? Where is your warrant? Show it at once." Peters roared from the hall, his face purple with rage. "The warrant is signed. The coffin stays in the house until it arrives." Holmes's commanding voice made an impression on the men. Peters slipped away into a side room, while the bearers carried the coffin back. "Quick, quick, Watson! Here is a screwdriver," Holmes commanded in a choking voice. "You take one too. A sovereign for each of you, my friends, if the lid is off in a minute. No questions. Faster, faster. That's it. One more screw. The last one. Now all together. Pull. Ah, it's coming. At last." The 5 of us tore the lid off, and at that very moment, we were nearly overcome by the heavy, sickly smell of chloroform. The head of the deceased was covered with a thick layer of cotton, wool soaked in the drug. Holmes snatched it away, and we saw the beautiful, delicate face of a woman of about 40. Holmes put his arms around her shoulders and raised her to a sitting position. "Is she alive, Watson? Can we be too late? Is it all over?" For half an hour, it seemed to me that all was indeed over. I feared that the lack of air and the poisonous fumes of chloroform had extinguished the last spark of life, and that all our efforts were in vain. We injected ether, applied artificial respiration, and did everything that modern medicine prescribes in such cases. At last, her eyelids flickered feebly, and the mirror held to her lips grew misty. Life was returning. A cab pulled up at the curb. Holmes raised the blind and looked out of the window. "Here is Lestrade with his warrant," he said, "but his birds have already flown." And yet, he continued, listening to quick footsteps in the passage, "here comes a man who can help Lady Frances better than we can. Good morning, Mr. Green. The sooner we move Lady Frances from this place, the better. As for the funeral, let it proceed, but now that poor old woman, who still lies in the coffin, shall make her last journey alone. If you wish to include this episode in your chronicles, my dear Watson," Holmes said to me that evening, "you may cite it as an example of a temporary eclipse which may obscure even the most sober mind. No mortal is immune to such lapses, but he is worthy of respect who is capable of realizing and correcting them in time. I believe I may count myself among such men." All night long, I was haunted by the thought that there was a detail to which I had not given proper weight, something unusual, a word, a gesture, a look. And when dawn broke, I suddenly remembered the words of the undertaker's wife. She said, "It had to be made to a special order, and that is why the workmen were delayed." They were speaking of the coffin. The coffin was made to a special order. That meant it was made to special dimensions. But why? And then it was as if I saw once more the high sides of that coffin and the tiny, pathetic figure at the very bottom. Why was such a large coffin ordered for such a small body? Why? To leave room for another. Both would be buried under a single death certificate. It was all as clear as daylight from the very beginning, but I had been blind. At 8 o'clock, Lady Frances, inside that coffin, will be placed upon the hearse. Our only hope was to seize the coffin before it left the house. The assumption that she was still alive was madness, but that very madness saved everything. As far as I am aware, these people have never committed a murder before. I suspected that, in the end, they would shrink from it even now. They would bury her without leaving a trace by which the cause of death could be established. And even if the body were exhumed later, they would still have a chance to escape justice. I hoped that these were the considerations that guided them. What followed, you remember well, and that terrible attic where the villains kept the poor lady, you have seen for yourself. This morning, they broke into her room, drugged her with chloroform, carried her downstairs, placed the saturated cotton wool in the coffin so that she would not wake, and screwed down the lid. A brilliant plan. I have met with nothing like it in the history of crime. If our friends, the former missionary and his wife, have managed to slip through Lestrade's fingers, one may expect their future career to be marked by even more remarkable achievements.